Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest The Suffering podcast. So, yet another new entry here. In this case, another new monster encountered within the game. This one, though, has a little twist, and it has to do with the fact that it's not really a monster related to the inmates. In other words, the way they suffered or died. But in this case, it has to do with the correction officers. This one, I would dare say, can be the most dangerous one within the game itself, but for the fact that it's pretty easy to avoid. But otherwise, if you don't, let's say, happen to avoid it, then it becomes very, very dangerous because of its surprise attack. Easily the hardest one to essentially ward off from seeing or from encountering or from previewing early on. And it has to do with this. It's known as the Nooseman, and you're looking at a picture of it right now. So let's go ahead, let's talk about all the information associated with this unique monster. So what is the Nooseman? Well, it's essentially a monster that's found in chapter 6. I believe the chapter is called I Can Sleep When I'm Dead. Just like all the other monsters so far within the game, there's a very good preview of sorts right before you encounter the Nooseman, and that has to do with the fact that you start seeing some of the other inmates and some of the other correction officers hanging on, let's say, a makeshift noose. You see them hanging throughout various parts of the cells, various parts of the hallways. They're just basically there. And it makes you wonder, like, exactly what caused them to do this, because obviously they wouldn't have hanged themselves unless they were committing suicide, which brings up another interesting thing. I love in the game how you can kind of see people's lives within them. Like you see some of the effects of people afterward. Like you'll see people basically dragging themselves, the after effects of like the blood as they drag themselves to a hallway, and then you see like their last point right before they died. And then in other places you see someone basically kneeling against a wall, their head completely gone, but then you see a shotgun next to them, and you realize that this is a person that thought to themselves they'd rather take their own life. Sometimes they even have like little medicinal or medical stuff lying next to them, further adding more, I guess, interesting info. At least I find it interesting, all these little details that the game plays. Such is the case with this Nooseman, because again, you start seeing all these inmates, these correctional officers hanging throughout various parts. And when it finally makes its appearance, it is by far the hardest one to anticipate ahead of time. So let's talk about its appearance first. Obviously, it's basically half of a man. In this case, from the top down, stomach up, in other words. And interestingly enough, it is completely skinned. So there's no skin associated with this monster. You can see everything. You can see the muscles, some of the bones, the ligatures, and in some cases some of the intestines, because of the way that the stomach is showcasing. Also, it seems to have some kind of burlap or sack covering its entire head, and you can't see exactly the eyes or any other type of thing, like in terms of its face. All you see is just this sack, and then of course its most unique feature is the fact that it has this very long rope attached to its neck, obviously indicating the way that it died, in this case being by hanging, which was another form of execution. And this thing will pop out pretty much anywhere. What makes it so difficult to anticipate is the fact that it comes from the ceiling. So unlike the other monsters that tend to appear from the ground, this one comes from the ceiling. So unless you're spending the majority of your time looking upwards, which in that case would be non-fruitful for the game, because then you would basically have no chance with the monsters on the ground, then you're pretty much left at the mercy of this Nooseman and when it comes out. Because there is a little hint, the closest thing, as long as you see like a puddle of blood towards the top of the ceiling wherever you're at, then that's where this thing may pop out. And when it pops out very quick. It'll basically just jump down from its rope, grab onto something, use those two powerful arms to grab onto the person, and then it basically chokes them to death, cracks their neck. I think I saw another one where it brought it back up, whoever that officer was, to its lair, like it disappeared within the blood. So it has several forms of attacks. The one that it does the first time you see it in full action. Of course, it grabs hold of a correctional officer, and then it kills him right then and there. So once you see that in action, then you know you're going to have to start looking out for these Noosemen, and anticipate and hope that there's going to be no more around. The thing also is the game purposely places these Noosemen throughout various parts where you have to run into them. So if, for example, let's say there's a ladder that you have to descend, there you are trying to get to the ladder, which just by the nature of the game means you have to angle yourself carefully in order for the character of Torque to start going through the animation of going down into the ladder. You can't just run into it. No, you have to run it. You have to go at it in a certain angle. While you're busy doing that, though, there's a Nooseman right above you, and then it suddenly just grabs you and then inflicts major damage. But other than that, that's why I thought it could be one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous creature within the game, because of its perfect element of surprise. But the thing that makes it so weak is the fact that once it's down into the, let's say, area where it descends from, and it doesn't happen to catch you, then it's relatively easy to just kill. You can just either shoot it or use a melee weapon, whatever is the case. The guy I was watching play the game was able to do so relatively easy. I think it was like 2 shotguns that did the trick, and then this thing was down. And then in other places, you could use I saw him use like a stun, a flash grenade, and then that way the Noosemen could be out for a couple of seconds, and then they were just easily taken care of. Now, as far as what they're supposed to represent, I was mentioning this earlier, interestingly enough, unlike some of the other monsters that are more representations of the inmates and the way they were executed, this Nooseman has to represent the correctional officers, the actual people manning the prison. And apparently there was some riot or something that occurred within the prison, who knows when, but whenever it happened, there was something really bad, like something that just completely just infuriated the inmates. Like whatever the correction officers did or whatever the prison did, the inmates were not having it at the time. So they rioted, and they were able to grab some of the correctional officers as hostages. And then as a final act, they took these correction officers, and then they basically skinned them alive, and then they lynched them onto some trees or onto some buildings, whatever is the case. So that's what these Noosemen are supposed to represent. They're actually supposed to be, in this case, the ghosts, the manifestations, the reincarnations, whatever is the case, of these deceased correctional officers, the ones that may have had some part to do with whatever caused the riot, or were innocent enough and didn't have anything to do with them. Either way, they live on as this thing. So that was very interesting to find out. Whenever the journal was providing that information, I was surprised to hear that this was, and I think it still is, the only one that doesn't have anything to do with the inmates directly. Instead, it's with the correctional officers. But that's it. That's pretty much all the info tied to this very unique creature. Yet another wonderful entry within the game of the Suffering. Great originality, great look to it, the way it attacks. I love the story associated with it. So thus far, things are going pretty good within the game of the Suffering. So alright, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.